The wind came first, a long, low howl rolling across Windmere Flats like something wounded and restless. Inside the Maxwell ranch house, infant Noah cried until his tiny body arched, his voice thin and desperate against walls that had forgotten warmth since the day his mother died. Ron Maxwell stood over the cradle, hollow-eyed, hands shaking with exhaustion and helplessness. Then the front door opened without a knock. A broad-shouldered woman stepped through the dust, cheeks flushed from the cold, boots coated in trail dirt, a canvas satchel clenched to her chest as if it were armor. She crossed the room before Ron could speak, lifted the child with practiced gentleness, and began humming an old Gaelic lullaby that softened the air like warm bread. Noah quieted in seconds. Martha Keene finally met Ron's stunned gaze and said, "Steady as stone. No one wants a fat girl, sir, but I can nurse the baby." Ron swallowed hard. "Then stay." Windmere Flats woke slowly, as if the land itself hesitated to face another day of wind. Pale grass bowed beneath long, unbroken gusts that swept across the plains with the voice of something ancient and dissatisfied. The Maxwell Ranch stood alone in the middle of that emptiness, a weather-worn structure resisting both time and grief. Its windows held no curtains, only the cold residue of the year since Evelyn Maxwell died, leaving her husband and infant behind. But on this morning, the first hint of warmth didn't come from the sun. It came from the kitchen. Martha Keene crouched before the stove, coaxing the embers to life with the patience of someone who had spent her whole childhood beside ovens that needed coaxing. Flames finally caught, blooming across the kindling and washing her face in soft gold. Her hair, a tumble of honey-blonde waves, glowed as though the fire itself had chosen to light it. A few bright strands had slipped free of her kerchief and curled at her cheeks. Her eyes wide, blue, almost too open for the harshness of the world, watched the fire grow with quiet satisfaction. She was a large woman, her frame soft and full in ways the city had always mocked. Years of tasting her own pastries and long hours leaning over warm ovens had shaped her body as much as they had shaped her skill. The first bakery she ever worked in, a cramped little shop run by her aunt, had been a place of wonder for her. She learned to braid dough at 7, to temper chocolate at 10, to turn cinnamon and butter into something holy before she was 13. But the city was not kind to a girl who loved the very sweets she created. By 18, customers whispered that she looked like she ate half the display. At 25, the new owner of the growing bakery chain told her she didn't fit the image and fired her after a single brutal meeting. The humiliation clung to her like kitchen smoke that couldn't be scrubbed away. Windmere Flats was her last chance to put her hands to work without someone staring at her body first. Upstairs, floorboards groaned under Ron Maxwell's steady descent. He appeared in the doorway with Noah against his chest, the child's cheek resting against the rough fabric of his father's shirt. Ron was tall, with shoulders shaped by ranch labor, but grief had hollowed him. His eyes carried the dull brightness of a man who hadn't slept without nightmares in months. Noah whimpered, and Ron absently brushed the faint scar near his collarbone, a habit born from years of worry and the months of raising a newborn alone. He paused at the threshold, taking in the unfamiliar scene, a golden-haired woman stirring life back into a kitchen that had forgotten warmth. Martha turned slightly, offering a respectful nod instead of a smile. She knew better than to intrude on a man's sorrow. The scent of oats simmering with honey filled the room. Firelight softened the cabin's harsh edges, and for the first time in a long while, Ron Maxwell felt something shift small, cautious, but undeniably present like the first fragile crack of thaw in a land buried by winter. Ron didn't step fully into the kitchen right away. He stood in the doorway as if the room itself had changed shape overnight. As if this woman, broad-shouldered, golden-haired, steady as a rooted tree, had altered the air simply by breathing in it. Martha felt the weight of his silence, but she didn't fluster. She slid the pot off the heat, wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron, and turned toward him with the calm of someone accustomed to being stared at for the wrong reasons. Noah squirmed against Ron's chest, fussing softly. The man's hand adjusted automatically, a motion both tender and unsure, as if he still hadn't learned how to hold something so small without fearing it might vanish like his wife had. He cleared his throat, a rough sound that didn't quite break the silence. Martha stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "He's hungry," she said, her voice gentle, neither apologetic nor assertive, simply true. Ron stiffened slightly, eyes narrowing with the instinctive caution of a man who had been left holding all the pieces of a life that once seemed whole. "I know," he answered, though his grip tightened, betraying the uncertainty beneath his words. Noah began to whimper again, rooting toward the crook of Ron's arm. Martha watched the motion, her blue eyes softening. "If you'd like," she added quietly, "I can take him, just until breakfast settles." The room braced for his refusal. Ron Maxwell was not a man who handed anything over easily, not burdens, not memories, and certainly not his son. But Noah let out a thin, exhausted cry, and Ron's shoulders sagged, slowly, hesitantly. He extended the child toward her. Martha received the baby with familiar ease, her arms naturally forming the cradle Ron never seemed to find. Noah relaxed instantly, his cheek pressing into the curve of her shoulder, small fists uncurling. Ron couldn't look away. There was something disarming in the way her soft frame became a landscape of safety the child recognized before he could speak. "You've had babies before," he said, more statement than question. Martha nodded. "My aunt fostered children who lost their parents on the road. I helped raise 5 of them. That's so. It is." Another stretch of silence followed. Wind rattled the loose boards outside. The stove crackled softly in reply. Martha rubbed Noah's back in slow, steady motions. Ron studied her not with disdain, but with the wary curiosity of a man used to misjudging women like her because the world taught him to. He noticed the faint burn marks on her forearm, the way her blonde hair curled near her temples despite the kerchief, the softness in her eyes that held no demand for him to speak. Most unsettling of all, she didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. She simply existed, steady and warm, in a room that had forgotten what warmth felt like. "You came a long way," he finally said. "Far enough," she replied. "Farther than most would bother traveling for a cooking job." He waited for her to explain herself. She didn't. The restraint intrigued him more than any story could have. Ron crossed his arms over his chest, the familiar defensive posture returning. "I keep to myself," he warned. "I figured," Martha said softly, shifting Noah's weight, "but babies don't." For the first time that morning, Ron's stern facade faltered, not into a smile, but into something looser, something realer, a crack in stone. Noah sighed in Martha's arms, drifting back toward sleep. Ron watched the scene in front of him, this blonde-haired stranger holding the only thing he had left in the world and understood, with a faint flicker of unease. that the house was no longer entirely his. Something had entered with the morning light, something he wasn't ready for, but already needed. The days that followed unfolded quietly, as though Windmere Flats itself were watching to see whether Martha Keene would take root or be carried off like so many others by the unrelenting wind. But she stayed. She stayed in the way a fire stays once someone learns how to feed it. Morning by morning, she was always the first awake, coaxing warmth into the stove before the sun had the courage to rise. Ron would descend the stairs with Noah in his arms, bleary-eyed and rigid, only to find Martha already stirring oats or kneading dough. The sense of honey and yeast drifting through the house like a memory of gentler years. She didn't speak much at first, neither did he. But silence stopped feeling hostile and simply became a language they both understood. Noah grew attached to her with the instinct of a child who recognized steadiness. He reached for her when he fussed, calmed the moment her hand touched his back. The first time Ron noticed this, something uncomfortable twisted inside him. Not jealousy, but the raw ache of witnessing a bond he couldn't create on his own. One afternoon, the wind rose early, whipping across the flats with enough force to rattle the window frames. Martha stepped outside with a basket of laundry, only to find Ron mending a section of fence near the barn. Sweat glistened at his temples despite the cold. His movements were methodical, almost punishing, as though he were working against something he couldn't name. When he looked up, he froze. Martha stood barefoot in the mud, skirt hem darkened with rainwater from earlier storms. Her blonde hair, loosened from the kerchief, whipped around her face in bright strands. Noah sat on her hip, giggling as the wind brushed his fingers. There was mud on Martha's calves, flour smudged on her sleeve. But she looked astonishingly alive. Nothing fragile, nothing fading. Everything about her defied the memory of Evelyn's thin, wilting frame in those final months. "Did you lose your shoes?" Ron asked, more startled than teasing. "Just the one," she replied. "My foot outgrew it. The shoe didn't." Ron didn't laugh. He only nodded, watching her a moment longer than he meant to. He returned to his work with a tight jaw. But something in him shifted that day. That night, Martha found a pair of small, well-kept boots left neatly at her door with a note. "These were Helen's. If they fit, they're yours." She traced the leather with trembling fingers, then held the boots to her chest. It had been so long since anyone had given her something without expecting anything back. She didn't thank Ron the next morning, not out of ingratitude, but because the look he gave her when he saw the boots on her feet said he already understood. In the kitchen, their choreography developed without discussion. Martha cooked while Ron checked the firewood. She chopped vegetables while he carried water from the well. Sometimes their shoulders brushed, and each time it happened, Ron stiffened, not because he didn't want the closeness, but because he wanted it too much and didn't know what to do with that truth. Martha noticed. Of course, she noticed everything. The way his fingers trembled ever so slightly when Noah cried too long. The way he exhaled in relief when Noah reached for her. The way he lingered near the doorway longer each evening, as though pulling himself away from the sight of her. Baking required effort. One evening, after she had placed a small loaf of blueberry bread outside his room, Martha found it gone the next morning. The linen folded neatly beside the empty plate. There was no thank you note, but the absence of crumbs. The careful fold of the cloth that was enough. The ranch hands noticed the changes too. Hank Dudley, wiping sweat from his brow, Muttered to another hand, "Boss ain't been this human since before Miss Evelyn." When Martha walked past, they didn't snicker about her weight like strangers in the city once had. Not after they tasted her bread. Not after they saw Noah cling to her like she was made of safety. Still, Ron kept his distance emotionally, even as the physical spaces between them grew smaller. Some nights he stood in the hallway outside Noah's room long after Martha laid the child down. Other nights, he lingered near the kitchen doorway, watching her shape dough with hands that had known both cruelty and kindness. He wanted to step in, to ask her to sit with him by the fire, to admit how her presence had begun stitching together parts of him he thought were ruined forever. But wanting felt dangerous. Wanting had cost him before. Martha sensed the hesitation, but didn't push. She had been pushed enough in her life to know how much gentleness mattered. Instead, she let the small things do the work: warm meals, steady hands, quiet hums of Gaelic lullabies, healing. She understood, didn't shout. It murmured. One night, Noah cried harder than usual, twisting in his blankets with fevered skin. Ron panicked, old terror clawing at him, the memory of Evelyn trembling in bed after childbirth, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and despair. He grabbed the baby too roughly, and Noah wailed. Martha moved toward him instinctively, but Ron snapped. "I didn't hire you to be his mother." The words hung in the air like the snap of a whip. Martha went still. Something deep in Ron cracked the moment he saw her expression, not anger, not offense, but a quiet, tired hurt. She lowered her gaze, placed a folded cloth on the table, and said only, "Boil water, add ginger, let it steep." Then she left the room, closing the door with more sorrow than sound. Ron followed her instructions, hands shaking as he dabbed Noah's forehead. The fever broke before dawn. The house softened in the quiet aftermath, the scent of ginger still warm in the air, and Ron, sitting beside his son's cradle, realized Martha hadn't abandoned him. She had simply stepped back so he could see what his fear had made him say. The next morning, he found a basin of fresh water steeped with herbs waiting outside his door. No note, just care. It was then he understood Martha wasn't asking to be Noah's mother, but she was already becoming the person both of them needed. And Windmere Flats, for the first time in a long while, felt like a place where something new might grow. The afternoon light slanted through the windows in soft, golden ribbons, catching motes of flour, still drifting lazily in the air. Martha had just finished kneading dough for the evening bread, her forearms dusted white, her cheeks flushed with the warmth of the stove. Noah stirred in his crib, offering one of those half-formed little grunts that meant he wanted to be held. Martha wiped her hands and lifted him with practiced gentleness. Noah melted into her shoulder instantly, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her apron. She swayed a little, humming a tune from her childhood, a Gaelic lullaby her aunt used to sing when the ovens were cooling and the bakery doors were closed. The melody filled the room softly, warm as rising dough. Ron Maxwell approached from the hallway without announcing himself. He had meant only to check on Noah before heading outside again, but he stopped short the moment he reached the doorway. What he saw froze him where he stood. Martha stood at the center of the kitchen. Blonde hair slipped loose from her kerchief, glowing gold in the afternoon light. Noah pressed his cheek into the curve of her shoulder, one fist tangled in her hair. The child was calm, more than calm, utterly at peace. Martha touched his back with slow, steady circles, and in that simple motion, something inside Ron twisted painfully. It was too familiar, too foreign, too much. He didn't step in, didn't call her name. He just watched. Noah opened his sleepy eyes, gazing up at Martha's face, and then, with a clarity that struck the room like a bell, "Mama." The word was small, but it hit with the force of a breaking storm. Martha went still, completely still. Her breath caught, her arms tightening around the child as though she feared he might dissolve into air. Noah blinked, delighted with the sound he'd made, and tried again. "Mama." A thin, trembling sound escaped Martha's throat. She wasn't smiling, she couldn't. Her entire face softened and broke all at once. 1,000 old wounds rising and falling like tides inside her. She lowered her forehead to Noah's, her voice a cracked whisper. "No, sweetheart, I'm not." But the words refused to finish. Her chest shook. Tears pooled beneath her lashes. Ron felt the world shift under his feet. For a moment, he was no longer standing in the kitchen of his ranch. He was back in that dim room a year ago. Evelyn curled away from him, refusing food, refusing light. Her voice so faint, he sometimes wondered if he had imagined it. Her final days were a blur of exhaustion and fading hope. And the word "mama," a word she never lived long enough to hear, hung between the memory and the present like a ghost. Yet here, now, his son spoke it, to another woman, to this woman. Martha lifted her head slowly, turning toward Ron at last. Her blue eyes were luminous with sorrow, apology, and something far more dangerous longing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for him to. I didn't want to." She clutched Noah tighter. "I'm not trying to take her place." Ron stepped forward, the world narrowing to the space between them. His voice was low, rough, almost hoarse. "You're not replacing her." Martha flinched at the gentleness, not the words. Ron continued, each phrase deliberate, as though laying down stones on a path he'd been afraid to walk. "He said it because he knows you, because you hold him like he matters, because he feels safe with you in a way I don't know how to give him yet." Martha shook her head, tears slipping free. But she was his mother. She was. Ron answered, "And she never got to hear him speak. But that doesn't make you an intruder in his life. Or mine." Silence thickened, warm and aching, the kind that asked for truth, not retreat. Ron swallowed hard. "When I saw you holding him, it didn't feel wrong." He exhaled shakily. "It felt like something I didn't know I'd been hoping for." Martha closed her eyes, her tears landing softly on Noah's hair. She wasn't sure what to say. Every cruel word she'd heard in the city flashed through her mind, too big, too soft, too much, and yet here was a child choosing her without hesitation. Here was a man watching her with something like reverence. Noah tugged her hair again and murmured, satisfied, "Mama." She didn't correct him this time. Ron stepped closer until his presence wrapped around the moment like shelter. He touched Noah's back, then very gently let his fingers brush the back of Martha's hand. The contact was small, but the shift inside both of them was enormous. For the first time in years, the Maxwell house felt alive, and Ron understood, with a mixture of fear and certainty, that nothing after this moment would ever be the same. The next morning, Windmere Flats felt strangely hollow, as if the wind had carried away something vital during the night. The ranch house, warmed by yesterday's moment of truth, now sat in a tense quietness that neither Ron nor Martha seemed to know how to break. Martha moved through her chores like a shadow of herself, She washed dishes with brisk, efficient motions, folded Noah's blankets, swept the kitchen floor, all without letting her gaze drift toward Ron. There was no sharpness in her silence, only resignation, the kind worn smooth by years of believing she should never take up too much space in anyone's life. And then, before noon, Ron opened the front door to find a carpet bag resting on the porch step. Martha's carpet bag. His breath jammed in his throat. She didn't run. She didn't slam the door or pack in a flurry of hurt. She simply prepared to leave quietly, the way people do when they think their presence has become a burden rather than a blessing. Ron felt the old panic flare in his chest, the same helpless, choking dread that had seized him during Evelyn's final months. Inside, Martha was fastening her shawl, her blonde hair loosely tied, blue eyes dull in a way he had never seen before. "You're leaving," Ron said. "Not a question." She didn't look at him. "I've done what I came here to do. You don't owe me anything." He stepped closer, fists tightening at his sides. "Is that what you think? That I'm trying to send you away?" "I think," Martha said softly, "you're a man trying to do right by a memory, and I've gotten in the way of that." She swallowed hard as she reached for the carpetbag's straps. "Noah calling me Mama, it wasn't fair to you, or to her." Her voice wavered. "I've spent my whole life being told I was too much, too big, too loud, too eager to belong. I won't force myself where I'm not wanted." Ron's breath left him in a single, shuddering exhale. He closed the distance between them in 3 purposeful steps. "Martha," he said, her name landing heavy with everything he hadn't been able to say before. "Don't mistake my fear for rejection." She looked up then, and the rawness in her eyes hit him harder than any blow he'd ever taken. Ron's voice dropped. "I lost Evelyn a year ago, not because she was weak, not because she didn't love Noah, but because she couldn't fight what her own mind did to her after childbirth. I tried to hold her together, but I didn't know how." He inhaled shakily. "And I've been terrified ever since that loving anyone again would mean watching them break, too." Martha's grip on the carpetbag loosened, but she didn't speak. Ron continued. "When Noah said Mama, it hurt, but not for the reason you think. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't disrespectful. It was the first time that word felt hopeful instead of haunted." The confession stunned her. He stepped even closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you don't belong here, Martha. This house hasn't felt alive since Evelyn died. You walked in and the air changed." Noah breathed easier. "I breathed easier." Her lip trembled, but she still hesitated. "Ron, I'm not the kind of woman men build futures with. I'm not delicate. I'm not—" He cut her off gently. "I don't need delicate. I need real." Windmere's wind howled through cracks in the windows, pushing the silence between them into something urgent. Martha lowered her gaze. "If I stay, what does that mean? For you, for Noah?" Ron swallowed, searching for the truth he'd avoided for too long. "It means," he said slowly, "that I'm done letting fear decide my life, and that I want you here because of who you are, not what you replace." Her eyes widened, blue and bright again, as though someone had lit a small lamp behind them. She breathed in, shaky, hopeful, terrified. Still, doubt lingered at the edges. "If you propose now," she whispered, "would you think I'm saying yes out of desperation, or that you're offering out of pity?" The question cut straight through him. He didn't look away. "If I propose now," Ron said, "it's because yesterday proved something to me. I'm not scared of loving again. I'm scared of letting you walk away before I get the chance." The words hit Martha like warmth after frost. She covered her mouth with her hand as emotions surged through her. Ron reached for her other hand, the one still holding the carpetbag strap. His fingers were rough and cold, but the grip was careful, giving her plenty of room to pull away. She didn't. For a long moment, they stood like that, the future trembling quietly in the space between them. Then Martha said, voice barely audible, "If you don't ask, I'll start believing you're afraid I mean it." Something inside Ron broke open, something long locked behind grief and guilt. The carpetbag slipped from her fingers. Ron leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, breathing the same trembling breath. No kiss, no dramatic declarations, just two wounded souls finally stepping into the same light. Outside, Windmere Flats roared. Inside, the house finally felt like a place someone might choose to stay. The dawn that broke over Windmere Flats the next morning seemed different, gentler somehow, as if the wind itself had paused long enough to let the first rays settle softly across the prairie. The Maxwell house, once a hollow shell of boards and grief, glowed faintly in the early light. Inside, the quiet felt full instead of empty. Martha entered the kitchen, robe wrapped loosely around her, blonde hair falling in soft waves after sleep. The kettle was already warm from the dying embers Ron had tended before dawn. She reached for her usual cup, the chipped blue one she'd claimed without asking, and froze. Beside it sat a small gold ring, simple, unadorned, a circle of plain metal that caught the morning sun and held it, as though it had been waiting for light all night. Martha's breath hitched. She didn't touch it at first. Her hand hovered just above the ring, feeling the warmth radiating from it as if it had a heartbeat of its own. It wasn't lavish or ceremonial. It wasn't a gesture wrapped in grandeur. It was honest. It was Ron. She finally picked it up, holding it between her thumb and finger, letting the gold glint across her skin. Her chest tightened in a swell of emotion she'd spent a lifetime believing she wasn't meant to feel. Behind her, Noah let out a soft babble from the front room, followed by Ron's deep murmur. She didn't call out. Instead, she set the ring back down purposefully, thoughtfully, and took a slow sip of her coffee. Ron appeared in the doorway. Noah balanced on his hip. His hair was tousled, shirt half-buttoned, and his expression was something between anxious and quietly hopeful. The way a man looks when he's handed over the last piece of his heart and is waiting to see what becomes of it. "You didn't say anything," he said, voice low. "I did," Martha replied, not looking up yet. "You just weren't in the room when I said it." Ron blinked, thrown off. "And what did you say?" She finally lifted her gaze. The soft blue of her eyes was bright, steady, unguarded. She nudged the ring gently toward him along the wooden table. "I'll marry you," she said, "if you promise to wash the dishes after the wedding." A stunned breath left him, followed by a slow, dawning smile, one she had never seen stretch fully across his face until now. It lit him from within, smoothing the lines carved by a year of sorrow. Noah squealed as if approving, reaching both hands toward her. Ron stepped forward, set Noah carefully in the high chair, then came around the table. He didn't need to kneel, but he did. Not because tradition asked it, because kneeling made her laugh softly. And Ron found he wanted to hear that laugh more than he wanted breath. His fingers trembled only a little as he slid the simple gold band onto her finger. It fit perfectly, not because it was crafted for her, but because Martha had spent her whole life shrinking and shaping herself to fit places that never deserved her. This time, something fit her. She reached down and touched Ron's cheek. He leaned into her palm like a man finally letting himself rest. Later that day, the house filled with gentle noise, the clatter of pans, Noah's delighted squeals as he crawled to Ron's boots, the low hum of Martha's lullabies drifting through the rooms like soft ribbons of warmth. Bread baked in the oven, its scent spilling out through the door cracks and into the wind-scarred yard as if claiming the land in its own quiet way. Outside, Windmere Flats stretched wide and unbroken, but it no longer felt empty. The wind still roared and wandered, but it no longer sounded lonely. And from that morning on, folks who passed near the Maxwell Ranch would say the same thing: the old house didn't echo like it used to. It didn't swallow footsteps or cling to silence. It sounded, at last, like a place where something had taken root, a fire kept, a child held, a heart chosen, a home.